This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Katherine Shen. There are certain signs and signals that indicate that summer is over. The alarm goes off earlier, the calendar starts filling up, school supply lists appear on the refrigerator. There are forms to fill out, lunches to pack, practices to get to, homework to help with. And suddenly, the leisurely pace of summer gives way to the family sprint. But maybe the back-to-school rush is just a smaller version of something we're doing all year long. We rush through breakfast, we rush to work, we rush through our inboxes, we rush out the door. And now, we have artificial intelligence and all kinds of technology promising to help us do things faster. But here's the strange thing. If we're getting better and better at saving time, why does it feel like we have less and less of it? Today, we're going to focus on the race to rush. We're asking what rushing is doing to our brains, bodies, and families, and whether it's possible to step off the treadmill. Joining me now, Rajita Sinha. She's a psychiatry professor at the Yale School of Medicine. Rajita, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And Brian Robinson, he is a psychotherapist, author of Chained to the Desk in a Hybrid World, a guide to work-life balance, and is a senior contributor to Forbes. Brian, thanks so much for being on the show today. Did we lose Brian? Brian, are you there? I think you might be muted.
Sorry about that.
There you are.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to talking with all of you.
And last but not least, we have the Venerable Shimbo, who's a Zen Buddhist monk priest, serves as the abbot and spiritual director of White Lotus Haven Zen of Connecticut. That's located in Collinsville. Venerable Shimbo, so good to have you here.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
So I usually say we're going to cut to the chase, but today we're going to slowly get to the first question, which I want to start with Brian here. You spent decades studying workaholism and family dynamics. So I think we tend to think of a workaholic as someone who works a bajillion hours during a week. But is there a broader culture of overfunctioning that a lot more of us are actually participating in?
Actually, there is. A lot of people are in a foot race with, I think, partly with AI now. But when we look at the stress levels, financial stress is up to 57%, and the job stress hovers around 50% if you look at all the surveys. So it seems like time is moving faster, and we're moving faster. And as AA increases or AI increases our tempo, we think we have to move with it. I call that cloud mind. Because we don't really stop to pay attention to the inside lane. If you think of yourself as a car, most of us are in our outside lane. There's nothing wrong with that. We have to be to some degree to, get things done and take care of our kids and get to work. But that inside lane is really what we're not paying attention to. And I call that sky mind, which is when we have a greater awareness of how we're living each day. And I'm happy to talk more about that, but we are in a very serious situation. Burnout is at its highest rate ever in our country. And a lot of people are burned out and don't even know that they are. We can talk about the symptoms of that later. But what I do with clients and what I like to do when I write is help people have a greater awareness of not just what's going on outside of them, the open awareness, but also what's going on in here, because that's where the change needs to happen first.
Well, we're going to talk a lot too during this hour about we're going to go to the past and the present and the future where I feel like a lot of us are built with the idea, or it's a learned behavior that we got to go, 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 go. Yeah. Is there a point at which being responsible, ambitious, and productive crosses over into something that's actually not healthy?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Well, yes. And there's also the reverse of that, being this whole wellness kick that we're on is great, but that can be taken to the extreme too, and that can become work. So it's really about balance. And the way I think of balance, we have again, if you're a car, you get out of your driveway by pressing on the gas. not keeping your foot on the brakes, but you're going to go off the cliff if you don't have your brakes. So it's really a balance. One is the sympathetic nervous system, which is the gas. The other is the parasympathetic, which is the brakes. And most of us are burning out because just like we'd burn out our car because we have the pedal to the metal. So it's incumbent on all of us that we figure out ways to apply the brakes, just like we would a car. That's what balance is really about. And it's different for everybody. I have a to-be list that I have to go with my to-do list, which is important. I have tall comings that go with my shortcomings. So these are the kind of things I personally work on and encourage folks that I talk to think about.
Well, and just to follow along the car analogy, I feel like currently we're at the point where if you're driving a car and your check oil engine light comes on, you're still going anyway because no one has time for that.
Exactly.
So,
That's right.
well, and then
We're running out of gas too.
right, we're
Yeah.
fuming, but still
Yes,
we're just going to keep
fuming.
going. So it sounds like the concept that we're busy or overscheduled is certainly not a new one, and I'm sure people have felt some version of this over several decades now. But Brian, is there something different happening these days that make it maybe feel worse or more intense? Because I'm imagining technology takes or plays a role, social media, cell phones, being able to check work email at night, things like that.
Yeah. Well, we're living in what's called the 996 workday. I don't know how familiar you are, but there's research now on many people are starting, especially startups, are working 9 hours a day, 6 days a week. And of course, I just read another study where there's something called restroom lurking at work, where it's actually a phenomenon where people are going to the restroom just to catch their breath and to deal with the stress, sometimes even to cry because they feel so overloaded, so hurried, so rushed, they just can't get everything done. I also am aware of another trend called the 2 a.m. Work interview. This is with AI, and more people are because they don't have time during the day. If they're working or they're parenting, and they're waking up at 2 a.m. to do job interviews to try to find something that's financially more lucrative and also that gives them a chance to have more work-life balance. So we see these kind of trends going on and they just seem to be escalating. And again, my concern is that we all take our lives back and we decide the life we want to live and not let anybody else or any trend make that decision for us.
So, Rajita, especially with what Brian just shared, there's so many changes that we're trying to make our lives better in some ways, but we're kind of going backwards because we're trying to make it better. What does chronic rushing actually mean to the body? When someone spends their days feeling like I'm late, I'm behind, I need to get to the next thing, and even waking up at 2 a.m. to do a job interview, even if they're not in an objectively dangerous situation, what is happening physiologically?
Yeah, thank you. No, I think we've gotten off on a good start here. The pressures are high, the demands are constant. Even before AI, there was emails and constant pressure to respond to work and two-parent families. I wanted to add that parent stress and family stress is also at an all-time high. So what happens is that that pressure or burden can build up. And one of the ways that it builds up is that your baseline levels shift up. So, as Brian just alluded to, that we have the sympathetic system, really just one way of thinking about is how aroused you feel or how pressured your head may feel. And there are ways in which basically what that is doing is that your baseline um, state of relaxation or calmness or balance, as Brian referred to, shifts up. We call that load. And that is one indicator of chronic stress. And when that shifts, the body starts trying to adjust to things. And so then you are no longer able to respond really well to something that may come up that has to happen. It's just sort of constantly being under pressure. And so you do have greater arousal, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure shifts up. That's what I mean when I say your basal levels shift up, your physiology actually shifts up. Over time, it affects sleep, it affects and emotional reactivity, for example, how we interact with people. We can have all kinds of what I call stress health symptoms as a result of those chronic stresses. And we tend to ignore it because we don't have the time. So checking in with ourselves and noticing is the first step in just sort of checking in and what is happening to our bodies. What am I feeling right now? Just even a momentary check-in could be very useful to start the process of putting the brakes. And then there's the effect on the brain, which we can get into more, but all of that physiological signals is not disconnected from how our mental state is. In fact, those signals are going right to the brain, and not slowing down affects our thinking, our what we call executive control, choices and decision making. And so that there's this whole spiral of connection there, which we can get into.
Yeah, so before we go into the spiral of connections, can you tell me a bit more about your work at the Yale Stress Center? How does chronic rushing show up for the families you work with?
Yeah, no, that's a great, thank you for bringing up the Yale Stress Center. We've been working with families for over a decade now, starting with parents of toddlers, and really to focus on how can we help parents stress, to in fact improve the lives of the children. And sort of then that has its own cycle of feeding. If the children are happier, the parents are happier. And so our focus has been how can we've developed a program called Parenting Mindfully for Health at the Stress Center. And this has some more evidence now. We've done randomized trials, prevention trials to both decrease parent stress, but also our target outcome is can it improve the child's level of stress and health, mostly looking at for toddlers, even how they're eating and their weight gain. Very direct effect on the body. And so one of the ways that we identify parent stress is, of course, asking them about their stress levels, but also identifying what we call stress health symptoms, because they may not be focused as much on stress or their chronic levels of stress, but they can tell you if they've been in pain or they have not been able to sleep well, or they're waking up too early because of the additional pressures that they're feeling. And all of that contributes then to the rushingness as we're talking about, and even in parenting without realizing it, wanting to get going, stay on a schedule. And of course, children have their ways of sort of demanding things, which can add to burden.
Well, I think we're in a constant state of wondering where time has gone. And Venerable Shimbo, Buddhism has a very different relationship with time. And especially the one that many of us have, the relationship of time that we have here in modern American life. What does Zen Buddhism say about the way of thinking about time?
Well, I mean, I think be here now is a good phrase. What is interesting to me about the show, I'm happy to be here, is it's called Where We Live. And I think we can rename it today to How We Live. Because, of course, we have all the mechanics of life, as have been described by Brian and Rajita. And it's just so wonderful that we share, both in science and in Buddhism, the same kind of fundamental principles, which is kind of like live in a middle way, be reasonable. We have to do all the things, but we're not victims of them. And so I think what it comes down to is a person needs to ask themselves, how am I living? And what can I do to live in a more sane and realistic way that is healthful? So we have practices, and Rajita was talking about practices at her center, which is wonderful to hear. A different way to practice, but a way that is effective and helpful. And I love Brian's analogy of the clouds. We use that in our teaching too. But it comes down, I think, to each person really asking him or herself, like, how am I supposed to live among all of the messaging that's going on, all of the stresses that may be going on, and making a vow to kind of live in a different way, perhaps,
Well, and talk about a lot of the messaging. Brian, one of the things that struck me in your work is that overwork isn't just something we privately choose. We're actually rewarded for it. So we're talking a lot of like historical, I think, pressure too with social reinforcement. So how does that kind of social reinforcement make it harder for people to recognize that you're actually doing too much?
Right. Even when you're doing too much, some people, and I can identify with this because I call myself a recovering workaholic, feel guilty
Mm-hmm.
when, and some people say, I don't even know how to relax. I was talking with a man once who built a fence in his yard, and he said he sat down to look at it, and all he could think about was the grass needed cutting, and he found flaws in the fence that needed fixing. So our mind sometimes just gets in the habit, really, of thinking about the future or regretting the past. And the important thing is living as much in the present as we can. And what does that mean? Part of it is what was just said about how to live, and being aware of how we're living. That awareness, one of the things that I encourage folks to do is I call these micro chillers, where we meditate on the go. We don't have to sit for 20 minutes anymore. We know that 20 seconds alone can help us feel less stressed, more chilled, and happier in our lives. So I call it mindfulness on the go. When I'm headed to work, I'm very conscious about looking at the sky or noticing my breath. All those things bring us into the present moment. And uh, it used to be I was always in the future. What am I doing next? What's going to happen when I do this? How am I going to get this done? And of course, that's the cloud mind where you're really setting yourself up for stress. But if you take 20 seconds and step back and say, what's going on in my inside lane? What am I feeling right now? My heart's pounding. Okay, I'm going to just look at the sky. I'm going to look at the grass. I live in the mountains and I have a view of the sunset in the western mountains. And there's an old saying by the poet uh, John Muir. uh, I'm in the mountains and the mountains are in me. So when I look at the mountains, I think, yeah, they're outside, but I can also feel them inside me. And that's just a really quick way with me and to chill. And there are a lot of quick ways. We don't have to spend hours and hours of time. We can do it while we're walking to work or driving to work or just sitting with kids. Um, so there you go.
Well, I also imagine, if you're thinking about, oh my God, I need to meditate, that in of itself is very stressful.
Yes, it is.
Sounds
How am I gonna? It's more work to
Right.
do, more stuff to do.
Well, and I want to talk more about the anticipation. Regita, do you want to
I just
respond?
wanted to add that
Yeah.
sometimes the challenge, especially for families and when they're rushing, is that they don't even have the access to the ability to notice. You're sort of programmed and you're going, So for us to say sometimes what we realized is noticing or observing or staying in the moment was just still a little further away from their attention. The attention was so grabbed up by other things. And so we started to develop behavioral regulation things. So what can they post for themselves in the kitchen, on the door, that would just sort of reset them and have them pause? Because sometimes children will demand that by having a little tantrum or not moving when they have to go, or saying, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do breakfast. These are all things that get in the way in this rushing time for families. And they really need something that is going to do a reset. And it's hard to just don't even have the mental space to connect in that moment to other things that could calm them. And so we would have things like stop, for example, just the STOP. Is sort of like, okay, everybody stop. We take a moment. The other thing that our parents would tell us, and we came up with this, was really sort of irreverent strategies, a reset strategy of like, where's the fire? just say to yourself and post, where's the fire, and is there, what is the need, is somebody dead? I mean, it sounds really irreverent, and like you don't care, and yet it's sort of so extreme that it does grab their attention. And so the ability to do those things can sometimes also uh, just disconnect from that stuckness that we see a lot in high stress levels.
Well, and Venerable Shimbo, I want to sort of thread the thought here because both Brian and Rajita just mentioned there's a lot of anticipation. There's a lot of need to be present. And there is an idea in mindfulness that we are often physically in one place while our minds are somewhere else. So what does it mean to actually arrive where you are?
Well, I brought a bell with me, and maybe we could do a little breathing exercise. And when I ring the bell, I would ask us all to take a deep breath in through the nose, all the way down, almost past the lungs, and into the deep belly. And just to kind of feel that breath. It's just a couple of seconds. Okay. How did that feel?
I think I feel better.
I do too.
I do
It's
too.
it's nice to feel alive and in the
Yeah.
moment. And I really like what Brian and Rajita are saying here about practice. I mean, Buddhism is about practice, and we all have to tend and practice our lives, and it comes back to how we live. So taking a deep breath is like a little, I think, what did you call it, Brian? Mini?
Well, I call them micro chillers.
Micro chillers.
Yeah.
We can all do micro chillers, and you can set your phone actually to ring like like an alarm, and have micro chillers that way all day long. No matter if you're at work or wherever you are. Excuse me, wherever you are. So I think we have to get into habit of, if you can afford some morning meditation practice, 10 minutes where you grab a cup of coffee, sit outside when the weather's nice, and just chill out. All of this leads to a place where we can kind of get unstuck from the stories we tell about life and who we are. And I just wanted to comment a little bit about Brian's contribution here about overwork. I think sometimes, not all of us, but many of us will overwork to avoid deep pain. We'll keep ourselves busy. And, once we start to slow down and relax, we can begin to maybe work on that or see those things and get the help we need.
And
I wanted to just mention that that's so true. And in my personal life, being a workaholic, I'm not going to say having been, it's something that I am really aware of now. It was exactly that. It was escaping from the pain inside. I didn't realize it, but it was like, an escape temporarily. And when you're working the way I worked, you're not thinking about the anxiety or the pain. But once you finish, it all keeps coming back. And I have found, of course, meditation and being in the present moment. 20 years ago, if someone had told me that, I would have just waved them away and said, I'm too busy to even think about that. And one of the things I hear all the time from folks is, I don't have time to think about being inside. I just don't have time. Well, we can't say that anymore, because the research shows 20 seconds makes a difference in lowering your stress. We were saying 5 minutes a few months ago, but the new research that's on its way out is showing 20 seconds. So there's no excuse. If you do, I encourage everybody who's listening to take 20 seconds and just say kind things to yourself, and notice how quick that goes. I mean, it is really fast. But the research shows if we do that, hand over heart and one hand over the belly, that we, after a while, we notice a huge difference in our body, as Rajita was talking about, and the lowered stress, and we're more clear-minded. we're calmer and we're more effective at whatever it is that we're doing.
Well, and I was just going to add that we're going to a break right now. It's over 20 seconds. That's more than enough time to chill out for a little bit before we come back to the next segment, which we were going to be exploring about how a stressful environment can affect kids. And listeners will love to know if these micro chillers work for you. Give us a call, 888-720-9677. We'll be back after a quick break. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. For many, the back-to-school season is riddled with stress and the sense that we're constantly behind. And then there are the people who are learning our relationship with time by watching us, kids. For many families, September doesn't just mean getting back to school. It means getting back to scheduling, school, homework, soccer, dance, music, tutoring, birthday parties, doctor's appointments. And somewhere in there, we're supposed to have family dinner and sleep and play, and maybe if we're lucky, do nothing. So what happens when children grow up watching the adults around them constantly hurrying? Still with me, Rajita Sinha, professor of psychiatry at the Yale School of Medicine, Brian Robinson, author of Chained to the Desk in a Hybrid World, A Guide to Work-Life Balance, and Venerable Shimbo, Zen Buddhist monk priest. So, Rajita, I want to start with you here. We've covered the fact that parents are feeling stressed right now. What does chronic stress in the family environment mean for children? Can children also absorb the stress that they're seeing in adults around them?
Yeah. Catherine, thank you for that. And you already started us off by saying that children are watching their parents. And in fact, mirroring and shaping of child behaviors directly comes from parents, the good and the bad. And no one is perfect, right? We are all in this moment here. And children are observing parents. They see the parents feeling stressed. And it's not always clear to a child, and the child's mind doesn't understand why they are stressed. And so that can increase anxiety levels in children. And not knowing makes the world sort of unpredictable. And it can affect things like how safe you feel. Is something wrong because my mom is feeling stressed, or my dad isn't around because he's working, or whatever it may be. And sort of having a place where you can talk about that, or having that moment where you can do nothing but even create some mental space for the family, for the interaction, could help children with expressing those anxieties and really learning how to identify that is an anxiety reaction. Otherwise, they're rushing around too, and that is a risk for the family. They're sort of going off in their own direction and not part of the rushing around plan, so to speak, in parents' lives. And we heard that a lot in our work with parents. They would talk about, it was time to get going, and my child will not put their shoes on and get out the door, or they're playing around with their food and not eating and not having breakfast, and the parent is trying so hard, and it's not happening, which adds, of course, more stress. So stress begets more stress, and in that moment, the level of burden on the parent, but the child as well, because they don't know what's going on. Why are we rushing? We had a parent give such a great example. One of them said that their child said, "But why quickly?"
Great question.
We have to go quickly. Well, why so quick? And or why do we have to go in the car right this minute? And it's and that's a child who's using their words and actually asking. There are so many who may feel the pressure so much that they don't understand what is going on. So a lot of our work is, of course, reducing parent stress, but also focusing on positive parenting, which patience is a really important aspect of that. Warmth, listening and engaging with the child, even when they're sort of going off in a different direction, having an emotional reaction, noticing what's going on with the child sort of gets you to notice yourself too.
Well, and Brian, kind of writing off of that sort of very stressful environment of needing to get to places quickly, which we're going to try to answer today. Why do we have to do that so fast? But I want to talk about overscheduling because there is a version of parenting that says, well, if this activity is good for my child, then there must be more opportunities for them. And especially in this day and age, there's so much competition for all of the things. So at what point, Brian, does enrichment actually become overload? And what might children be missing when every afternoon or every moment is structured?
I always think of Michael Jackson when we talk about that. Those who are listening who've seen some of his story and how as a child he never got to play. And play and being whimsical and being silly and letting go are really essential for children and adults, actually. And I always ask, when was the last time you had a good belly laugh? Well, how can you create that environment? The Italians have something endemic in their culture called, I'm not really good at Italian, but it's il dolce far niente, and it means the sweetness of doing nothing. And you see it. The closest thing we have in our culture is killing time. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. So scheduling is great. Back to what Venerable said early about the middle way is another way of talking about balance. The middle way is scheduling. Overscheduling is out in it's overdoing it. It's going over. And that's what I think we all have to look at because that's going to create. I actually did a study many years ago on the effects of workaholism on children. And one of the findings were that children compared to non-workaholic families had more anxiety, they had more external locus of control, and less self-regulation when they grew up in workaholic homes. So we know that that gets passed down to kids, and it does affect them emotionally and psychologically.
Well, I want to go to Venerable Shinbo here, going from whimsy to the idea of boredom, because I think that has a negative connotation to it, because we often see boredom as something parents, in these cases, need to solve. But from a contemplative perspective, what happens when we do allow ourselves and children to experience moments where being restless or having nothing to do is a good thing?
That's a great question. I love boredom. I grew up with boredom, putzing around the house or going out in the woods and walking around and making forts and riding your bike.
I love the word putzing. So
yeah, I do too. I think boredom is a really great thing to have because it allows you to be creative, right? I mean, when there's nothing to do, you find a way to express, or you end up laying on the ground and looking at the sky, or playing with bugs and things like this. So, and that all goes back to, like, are we scheduling boredom into our busy schedule? It's how we live again, right? That phrase. As a parent, how do you want your family to live, right? Not unlike the overworking that Brian is talking about. I think that we can be over-parenting and over-scheduling, maybe to avoid some pain there too. So it's important, what Regina was saying, like kids watch their parents. Who did the parents watch? The parents in Buddhism should be watching their minds to see, like, where all of this busy activity is originating from. And I guess the last thing I would say, based on Regita's work, is kids are our teachers. We often think of them as maybe, don't have wisdom or lesser, but really they bring a lot of wisdom to the table.
Well, if anything, you'll get honesty.
Definitely. Definitely.
Well, and I wanted to ask, because you teach kids in your practice sometimes too. So what does mindfulness look for them?
Well, for them, it's very simple. I mean, in Buddhism, we have the 6 paramitas. These are virtue teachings, and it's very simple. It's about generosity. It's about slowing down. And when we are teaching kids, we just ask that the parents are also in practice, because we don't want to be kind of like a another activity that the kid has to cross off their list. So it's a practice for both parent and child to do. And also there's breathing, as we have discussed. And also attentiveness, being kind. We've kind of lost that in the busyness of things. And so just kind of holding doors for people and setting the table, and smiling and saying, hello, how are you doing? Simple things, go a long way.
Well, sometimes keeping it simple is the best way. After another quick break, we do have some practical tips on how to incorporate slower moments into your busy lives. We know how busy you are and you're overwhelmed with an endless list of things. Let us know if you have any questions for our guests. Give us a call, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-9677. This is Where We Live. Stick with us. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. So maybe we've convinced ourselves that we are overdoing it. Maybe our bodies are telling we're stressed. But here's the problem. Knowing you're overwhelmed doesn't necessarily make you less overwhelmed. So we're going to spend our last segment on something more useful. What can we actually do? Not a 10-step morning routine, just small ways to give our brains and bodies a little room to breathe. So Rajita, I want to start with the nervous system here. When someone realizes, I am constantly stressed, my brain never shuts off, I'm tired all the time, what's the first thing they can actually do to sort of interrupt those stress responses? Love something that listeners could try to do today, not something that requires an hour of free time.
Yeah. Thank you, Catherine. Actually, you just started the first point of that, which is they realize or they notice, right? So awareness, this has already come up in the program. They notice that they're stressed. Well, that's step number one. Just takes a moment to notice, because then you apply what we've already been talking about, what we just practiced with Venerable Shimbo, is just take a breath. Or just tell yourself, if you're not in a moment where you can go to your body and take a breath, just say stop. Just even say slow down to yourself. And that slowness will immediately start to say, well, how do I slow down? What do I need to do? A lot of times people have to do something. If you just have them do a mental thing, it's harder to do because their mind is just rushing. And so putting their hand on their chest or just even raising their arms slowly up as they breathe in. And then breathe out, they bring their arms down. So we actually bring movement into it just so they can get grounded in their bodies and in their physicality and out of their minds. Because a lot of times the rushing is also happening in the mind. Mm-hmm. There's pressure in the mind. So those are just momentary things that you take a moment to do. And it can sort of reset. It can get you going on pause and start the processing of reset in the moment, just literally in the moment.
Well, Venerable Shimbo, as we're in the moment, can you give us a very simple practice for someone who does have 30 seconds? What could someone do in that moment to come back to the present?
Well, I think putting one's hand on their heart and on their belly, as has been described by Brian, taking deep breaths like Rajita was talking about, and using physicality. I think that's a great thing. We're often so caught up in the mind that it's helpful to maybe wherever you are, pick up your coffee and lift it up and put it down. Anything that can interrupt our minds from kind of the loop that we put ourselves in is important. I would say, but fundamentally, go back to the breath. Go back to the breath. And also, if possible, sometimes you're too dysregulated, but to remember gratitude, like I get to be in this place. I get to see these people. I get to do the work that I do. Gratitude is important too, I think.
Well, and Brian, what are some of the behaviors that tell us we are overfunctioning? Not the dramatic burnout, sort of the everyday little things that build up to the big things. What are some small warning signs that we can look out for?
Well, that I'm in the future thinking about what I haven't done, or I'm regretting something that I should have done better, the should in quotation marks, my heart racing, my thoughts circling around like a school of sharks. Those are a few, but I wanted to also mention two things that I do that I encourage other people to do to bring myself into my body and into the present moment. One is called grounding, is where I just am aware, to use that word aware, that's the first step, as Rajita said, is my feet are on the floor and I'm focusing on that place where the floor is supporting my feet. And as you focus in that spot, all of a sudden you start to feel like you're back in your body. You can also do that if you're in a chair that has a back on it, is notice the back of the chair and that spot exactly where the back of the chair is supporting your back, and just hold it there for a few minutes. And you're not thinking about the future. You're not thinking about the past. Your thoughts settle, your heart settles, your breathing settles. Um, so anything that brings you back into the present moment. The other thing that's really quick that folks can do in seconds is just sit for 20 seconds and notice sounds. Any sound. It could be the gurgling stomach, it can be ambient sound of traffic, it can be people talking in another room. And just notice as many sounds as you can identify. And all of a sudden, again, you're not thinking about the future, you're in the present moment, and you notice that you feel calmer automatically just in 20 seconds simply by noticing the sounds around you. That's meditation, by the way.
And so, Rajita, for those who might not be into breathing work, I have a couple friends that they have said meditation actually stresses them out. So they look for other ways to do self-care. But when we hear the term self-care, I feel like it's often associated with a list of things to do and then often a list of things to buy. So is there a danger that even self-care becomes another form of productivity or maybe even competition? So at some point, can wellness itself become another list of things that we're failing to accomplish?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We've had so many folks who do say, "I cannot turn into my breath. It just is stressful." And so then they will either reject wellness because they think all it's telling me about is breathing, or they will overschedule with other kinds of things, which is what you're referring to. And I think there are things you can do. I loved what Venerable Shimbo said about the coffee. I think there's a practice about in the doing, staying in the moment in the doing. And one of the ways that we've done that is to really identify with people what is it that they love to do? Even if they don't have time, what do they engage in? Do they go walking? Do they go running? Are they, and I had somebody who was very, very stressed, a high executive, who said, I have no time. And we identified just her climbing the stairs in her building. For exercise, she would climb upstairs. And so we said, how about you take one step at a time and one stair at a time? And that was a way of directing her attention to movement as opposed to breath. Not costly, not engaging with a whole list of wellness activities. There's nothing wrong with that. If you like to go to a yoga class or a mindfulness class, that's great. But that's more time and more energy and more demands on you. And so I think even the small micro practices, as Brian was saying earlier, the small things you do, just slowing down and using them to get in the moment and get in the present moment can address what we're talking about.
Well, I'm kind of laughing at myself because I'm thinking some of the self-care routines that people love is getting candles, and I've gotten one before. Found out I was allergic to the scent, and I'm sneezing, I'm like snotting, and I'm not relaxed. So I appreciate all the small things that we can do.
I always say self-care is not a bubble bath, although there's nothing wrong with a bubble bath.
I mean, I love a bubble
Takes
bath.
time and energy, yeah.
Right.
Just not with a candle.
Self-care is everything we've been talking about. 20 seconds. So anybody has 20 seconds, just to notice how they're talking to themselves. We haven't talked about self-talk, which is huge, which most people talk to themselves in negative ways. There's something called a negativity bias that we're all born with. It's in our DNA. And so reversing that and saying nice things, kind things, noting our talk, I call them tall comings, to go along with our shortcomings.
Yeah, that's a great point. And as we're talking about these things together, it strikes me that meditation and all of the things we do to calm down, that I hope the listeners don't think that we do these things to become better people, that we're not good enough now. And all of us have dignity, and we're good enough now. It's just that we need sort of practices to help us to regulate and these kinds of things. So it's like self-care, right?
Right. Well, I'm sad to ask you to do this a little faster, but based on what you just mentioned, in Buddhist practice, is the goal actually to become better at managing an impossible life, or is there something deeper about sort of changing our relationship to the experience itself?
That's a great question. It's about what Brian was talking about, actually. It's about when, you're listening to a sound outside, listen to it, become one with it. Brian, I liked your analogy or your image of the mountain, becoming one with the mountain. Yeah. Zen Buddhism is becoming one with the experience that's in front of you rather than kind of being in some fantasy place. So that's basically what it is.
Well, and Rajita, because we're in a back to school season, if you can give parents one rule for the school year that might help them resist the urge to overfunction, what would it be?
I would go back to what I was saying earlier about stop, which is slow down, starts with slowing down, taking a breath, saying to yourself, if you're a cognitive kind of driven person, just say, where's the fire? Little things like that, and putting stickers around to do that. Because that gets you going to thinking about the little things. Everybody, the whole family sort of takes a breath together. And the children actually love that. So I would do those little things. And we've found that parents actually can implement that and are very good at doing that and find that it does help.
Yeah, and just to add to that, one of the things I encourage families to do is keep a bell in their home so that when anybody's needing some quiet, we can all practice together. So I'd like to practice the bell together again, if you don't mind. Ah, that felt good.
I don't know about you all, but just hearing the bell is like an instant calming sort of experience.
Yeah, it's really helpful.
So I want to thank the Venerable Shinbo who brought the bell in. And if this inspires you to get yourself one, I think we all want one now for the office. So I feel like having that collective experience is really important. Again, you've been listening to Venerable Shinbo, who's a Zen Buddhist monk priest who serves as the abbot and spiritual director of White Lotus Haven Zen of Connecticut, Inc. Venerable Shinbo, thank you so much for sharing your bell with us today.
Thank you.
And Rajita Sinha, who's a professor of psychiatry in the Yale School of Medicine. Rajita, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And Brian Robinson, who's a psychotherapist and author of Chained to the Desk in a Hybrid World, a guide to work-life balance. Brian, appreciate your time as well.
Thank you, Kat.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Chloe Nguyen. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you all so much for listening. And we hope this conversation can help you relax and slow down a little bit.